Okay, I know that I said that the next video was going to focus on ethics, but I want to take a very brief detour on what people care about, what they think about, um, and then we'll discuss some ethics, and then we'll get into politics. So Gallup has been asking this question for the past 85 years, and that is, what do you think is the most important problem facing this country today? So if we were in class, we'd have a fun time going through this, and you can go through it if you want and pause the video whenever you find something that's particularly interesting. I'll point out the things that I find interesting. And these are various moments in Gallup history from 1935 moving forward. What is the most important problem? In 1935, this is the height of the Great Depression, a couple of years after Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office. We still had huge unemployment, right? So I don't want to imagine what it would be like if this next recession lasted 6 years, but this would be roughly the analogy 6 years from now. A lot of people cared about unemployment. There was also some bubbling going on in Europe. And so the biggest foreign policy issue was keeping out of war. People worried about budgets, economy, social security, basically stability. And then 1941, right before Pearl Harbor, people really did not want to get into another world war. That was by far the issue that dominated. And so foreign policy was the issue that most people cared about. A lot of people still cared about labor and cost of living and unemployment. After the war ends, now the US is no longer in a Great Depression, but people are still interested in seeing how the economy is going to fare. What are the jobs after the war? How are we going to maintain a lasting peace? How are we going to deal with labor issues? And then you see some bubbling up of civil rights and race relations here, which we talked about a little bit in the space race section of the class. Education is another one that keeps coming up for the next few decades after this. Religious and moral decline comes up again and again. In 1949, this is the year that the Soviet Union detonated their own atomic weapon. And so this is the height of the Cold War. So threat of war, maintaining peace, and communism are the biggest foreign policy issues. Domestic issues, civil rights has started being a thing that people are paying attention to. But by and large, economic issues are also front and center, cost of living being one of them, housing. Right, this is the rise of suburbia, Levittowns as they're called. In the 50s, the war in Korea has ended, and so we're worried about the Soviet Union and world peace, nuclear arms. Khrushchev is now in charge after Stalin has died. So those are the issues if in foreign policy world. We're also worried about the Red Scare here in the United States. I forget if this is the second or third Red Scare, but this is an issue that we keep coming back to again and again. Crime pops up as an issue. Unemployment is still a pretty big problem. In post-Sputnik world, war is a fear. Soviet Union, nuclear arms, or foreign policy issues. Economically, people are still worried about unemployment and inflation being the big issue. But now we've started seeing quite a bit of so Emmett Till's murder has happened. This is right before the the freedom rides. This is a time of civil rights. So in 58, after Sputnik, the space program and civil rights are the biggest domestic issues in education. People are worried about the economy in general, and really, we were of singular focus in 1958 in a way that is fascinating. I don't think we'd seen since 41. By the 60s, threat of war, communism, Soviet Union are the biggest issues. You would think the space program would be a top issue here as well, but no, civil rights and race relations are the biggest domestic issue. Unemployment still is a problem that we care about. In the 1960s, the Vietnam War started, and so we were sending troops, and people are worried about that. And communism, the domino theory, is why we said we were going to the Vietnam War. But by and large, 1965 is also the pass of the Voting Rights Act. And so civil rights and race relations are at the forefront of everybody's mind. There's also education, religious moral decline again, unemployment again. Fast forward to the end of the decade, getting into the draft, getting to the moon. And so people are really worried about the Vietnam War and peace, just trying to find a peace. They got tired of this unpopular war. Civil rights and race relations are still a top issue. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated the year before. And even though we all appreciate him now and look up to him now, he had a very low approval rating at this time. So this was a very big issue in the United States. People were fighting for rights. Teenage problems. Yeah, that comes up again and again, the youth protests. Okay, so civil rights in Vietnam, again, the 60s. By Nixon's second term, cost of living has become a big issue. He has started pushing this drug war, has used it in the nightly news to beat up on really basically his political opponents. We'll talk about that at a later date, and links drugs to crime. So that'll be a topic for the next section of this class. Civil rights is still an issue people care about, but now people are talking about big government. And for the first time since Gallup was asking this question, some people, I'd say about 3% of people, said that the environment was the most important issue. For the first time, the EPA had been started in 1970. In the late 60s, there were a couple of rivers that caught fire, so there was reasons to worry about the environment. But this is the first time. And it completely goes away the very next year as cost of living. There's another economic downturn. People are dissatisfied with the government because we had a corrupt president. And at the end of this year, he resigns and is pardoned by Gerald Ford. So what else? Social Security, civil rights. Still, some people still are arguing about that war. People are, we're finally ending our war in Vietnam. We're finally leaving. The United States says leaving. We didn't accomplish many of our goals. Yeah, unemployment is another issue that grows at the end of the decade. When Jimmy Carter is president, he is president during tough economic times. So there's energy problems with oil embargoes, and it's just a tough time. Environment pops up as an issue again, which is interesting. And crime is still an issue that people care about. Has this apathy, which is fascinating. The people that thought that apathy was the most important issue facing the country should probably take some more drugs. Yeah, so other foreign issues is the biggest foreign policy issue. Reagan's first term in office, he comes in with lots of inflation and cost of living. Stagflation is called. Unemployment, energy problems still. People are dissatisfied with government, worried about crime and war and that kind of stuff. His second term, people are afraid that there's going to be another war. There's also budget and unemployment issues. Nobody during this entire decade seemed to be caring about the environment. We'll see that change in '89. Cost of living, unemployment, and budget are the biggest economic issues that people cared about. In '89, this is when Jim Hansen testifies in front of Congress that global warming is real and it will be very damaging. Also, for the first time, we see people worried about AIDS. Drugs. Why was drugs such a big deal? We'll talk about that later in the last section of this class. Reagan pushed this drug narrative and pushed for these really, really harsh policies on drugs, so that a lot of people that were arrested at this time for marijuana possession, some of them are still in jail right now. Economic issues, people worried about economy, poverty, that kind of stuff. Trade. When Bill Clinton is elected, people are worried about the economy, stupid. People are also worried about the Middle East. We had just finished the first war in Iraq. There was police action in Somalia. I don't know why we call them police actions. They probably don't seem like police actions to the people living there. But healthcare becomes a big push because Clinton is pushing for healthcare here at this time. Doesn't get very much in the way of healthcare, and 1994 sees a complete overtaking of the House of Representatives by the Republicans for the first time in 40 years. By Clinton's second term in office, people are worried about crime and drugs, unemployment, the economy, the budget, education. A couple of people are now worried about environment and civil rights and race relations again, immigration, trade. So this is after NAFTA. Big government, dissatisfaction with government. And again, religious and moral decline. A lot of people really cared about that. Healthcare is still an issue. Healthcare pops up in the 90s and stays around up until today, actually. Okay, George W. Bush takes office, passes this big tax cut. Everybody gets a couple of $100. Basically, nobody's worried about foreign policy issues. I guess there's some worry here about stem cell research, which we'll talk about later. Economic issues. George W. Bush was pushing for No Child Left Behind, which was this really weird program that I narrowly managed to avoid because I grew up next to Texas and I knew that most of the people that were in Texas hated the No Child Left Behind program that had been piloted there. You guys must have gone through that. Healthcare is still an issue, dissatisfaction with the government, drugs, crime, Social Security. So this was a time when people were trying to privatize Social Security or to try to make it more solvent in the long run. And the children, I guess, people worried about the children. Abortion pops up, which is fascinating. I don't think I'd seen that before. By 2005, we're in a war in Iraq, which is dominating international issues. People are worried about terrorism, war on terror. People are dissatisfied with government, really worried about Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, religious and moral decline, unemployment, poverty, and the economy, a couple of other things. When Barack Obama is in office, this is the very beginning of the Great Recession. he got that at that started at the tail end of that election cycle. And so he had to deal with a hemorrhaging economic losses. There was economic turmoil, unemployment, and still the war in Iraq to worry about, but some people still cared enough about the environment. Not that much happened at that time. I guess 2009 was the time of the Copenhagen meeting, which was the closest we were able to get to a major climate agreement in about a decade at that time, but that fell apart for reasons we'll discuss in a different video. Healthcare, so the Affordable Care Act is pushed forward over a long period of comments. I remember this. And eventually it is a very different program than the one that Obama had campaigned on, but it was the program that it was able to pass. So we have a different healthcare system, which made a lot of people dissatisfied with government, so that in 2013, Obama's second term, people are still worried about unemployment and the economy and the budget. I remember worrying about that. Guns, healthcare, immigration becomes an issue, religious and moral decline, lack of money. When Trump is elected in 2017, some people still care about the economy, but by and large, the biggest issues are the economy, unemployment, healthcare, dissatisfaction with government, elections, and civil rights. Terrorism and immigration and national security, I think, look pretty big as well. So the bigger these are, the more people care about it, of course. Okay, wait, this is March. I wanted to show you guys February. Yep, sorry. Sharing, okay. So last month, and this took me hours to put together, guys, so please appreciate this, damn it. Hours. The biggest worry that people had was the government and poor leadership, and then immigration and healthcare were up there as well. Environment was probably more people cared about the environment and unifying the country than I think I've seen up until now. So what happened after February? I guess people stopped caring about lack of money, terrorism, the war in the Middle East, foreign policy and aid, lack of military defense, crime, violence, election reform, Medicare, drugs, and the judicial system, and guns. Because this month, people really, 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 really care about coronavirus. Everything else got squeezed around. I think we'll see that grow even more next month. All right, so what have we seen? We've seen that the people, the environment has been on and off an issue since roughly the 70s. People have cared about it a little bit. And if you drill down into that, you'll see that over time, more people have believed that global warming is caused by human activities. It's still only 2/3 of the country. Only 2/3 say that most scientists believe global warming is occurring. 3/5 believe that it's already begun. About half think that it will pose a threat in our lifetime. 4/9 of people worry a great deal about global warming. So roughly 2/3 of the people that believe in it worry about it. And most of those think that the news is underestimating this. So the trend is roughly positive in that more people are worrying about this, but it's still barely, in fact, it doesn't break 2/3 of the American public thinking about global warming as an issue. So there are about 30% of concerned believers, or sorry, 51% are concerned believers. About 30% are in the middle, and then there's 1 in 5 people that are just skeptics, just deny that global warming is happening. So in the next video, we'll talk about some ethics, and then we'll come back to public opinion. The basic thrust here is that a lot of people believe that climate change is happening, and it has become more and more of an issue, but still not the priority for most people throughout most of the time that people have cared about it. Okay.